Teşekkürler. Merhaba. And that, I'm afraid, is the limit of my Turkish. But good afternoon, everybody. I was really thrilled when Ali asked if we would come over and talk a little bit about some of the things we've discovered in our work. I see I have 20 minutes. My presentation is probably only about 15, so I'm going to start with a short story. So I come from Ireland. And on the way to, I've been to Turkey several times before, I've been to Istanbul. But there's a great story, because we are here telling stories today. There's a great story about amazing kindness from the Turkish nation to Ireland back in the famine. So a long, long time ago, Ireland was very, very poor. We had a huge famine in the 1800s. So millions of people left Ireland. We traveled all over the world. And I guess that's why we're quite a dispersed nation from that perspective. So a cry for help went out. And one of the few countries that actually said, yeah, we'd be prepared to help was the Ottoman Empire. So the Sultan here in Turkey, in Istanbul, in I think it was 1847, he said, okay, I will donate £10,000 to help the starving Irish people. But there was a problem. So this is nothing against Dave, but Queen Victoria said, no, you can't do that. She said, I've only donated 2,000, so I don't want you to donate more than me because it's going to make me look bad. So, mindful of international relations, he only sent 1,000. But that's not the end of the story, and I'll tell you the rest of it. But first of all, I'm going to get on with the presentation, and then if we have a couple of minutes left, I'll tell you the rest of the story. So, we're going to talk about the connection between career site, content, recruiter, and candidate. So these things are all kind of intertwined together in terms of how you as brands engage with candidates, how they engage with you, and then ultimately how they have conversations with recruiters as you try to hire them. So a little bit of background to explain how we have some of this data. So I look after business development for a company called Clinch. We make a recruitment marketing platform, and basically what that means is we take sales and marketing techniques, like people would use things like HubSpot or Marketo, and we bring those same types of functionality to recruitment. So we sit on top, or we integrate, or we become the career site. We track applications as they come in, and we measure what candidates are engaging with as they go through their candidate decision journey on their way to becoming, hopefully, a successful hire. I'm also involved with another startup that's involved. It's called AdRecruit. So what it's doing is it's actually building employer brand analytics. So analytics very much focused on helping employer branders understand how their content is being engaged with, how it's working, and how they can do more to potentially leverage the value of that content that they've spent a lot of money creating and make sure it gets seen by more people. So why does it all matter? It matters because a lot of money is spent on employer branding. And if you think about how a candidate engages with you all as a potential employer, it starts to get pretty interesting. So, most candidates find your company via job. So over here in Turkey, I'm sure a large percentage of them start off in career. They obviously start in sites like Indeed. But the reality is most people find your organization via job. They're looking for their job title in their location, and that's how they find you. They get lists of opportunities from job boards, and they click on them, and they start to engage with you as a potential employer. And that's great, but in a lot of cases, that zero moment of truth, which Dave spoke about this morning, so the very first exposure to your brand, quite often that's controlled by a ATS vendor or a limited career site platform, and they end up on something like this. So, okay, it tells me about the job, whoopee-doo, I saw that already on career.net. Doesn't tell me anything about the story of Patrick or any of the amazing content that you guys have created in employer branding. That's what I get. And that causes a problem. So we'll get to that in a minute. So if you invert that, it means that less than 15% of people are interacting with you on the very first touch point directly to your career site. So they're missing all the amazing content. They're not coming here directly. They might get here eventually if you're lucky, but a lot of them miss all the effort that's gone into the employer branding piece. So why is it bad? Well, it's bad because about 80 to 90% of the visitors to those job pages, they don't hang around. They press the back button, they go back to Indeed or career.net, and they look at the next employer down the list because you've written the story, but you haven't told it on the job, and that's where they're landing and arriving. So they just miss this amazing content, and some of them lose interest in your company. With a bit of luck, some of them don't. They end up, maybe something about the job description, maybe they liked some of the content that was on the job. maybe something makes them just go that little bit further, and they will ultimately try and Google your company, look at the career site, and find out more about why they should consider you as their next employer. So the other thing that happens that we see a lot, and we've got a lot of this data from Clinch, we see that the people who do stay, a lot of them go straight to making an application. And it's kind of tough because a lot of the applications you get, and I guess everybody in the audience here has applications coming, fast and furious for certain roles, and yet they still can't get the right people they need to apply. So one of the challenges is a lot of people have made up their mind to apply for 10 jobs today, and they will hit those jobs, they'll apply for them as quickly as possible, and they still won't engage with the employer branding content, even if you serve it up on a plate. And the problem with that is they make, relatively speaking, poorer quality applications, and they don't really understand the company. And quite often, a recruiter has to deal with this because he'll call somebody back and he'll go, "Oh, I don't remember which job I applied for. Which company are you again?" Because they've literally made so many applications. So if we look at the numbers again, we have 1,000 people visit, 120 make an application, and about 40 of those engage with the content that's probably sitting on the main career site. And if you look at a typical hiring funnel, and this is aggregate data from across the world from an ATS called JobVite, you see their funnel looks something like this. Funnels are maybe getting a little bit old, but we'll talk about that later. So 1,000 visitors, you get 120 applicants, 15 get interviews, and about 5 get an offer. So if you kind of combine those two pieces of data together, what you start to see is the intersection of the people who've visited your career site, visited your jobs, applied, and actually bothered to engage with your employer branding content to really understand the mission and values of the company. It's really small. And if we look at the data, we start to see that this is not just interesting, but it's really important. We analyzed candidate behavior across a bunch of different employers, and what we found was the people who applied on a subsequent visit, so they didn't just look at the job on Indeed or Career, hit the job page and make an application and apply that day. The ones that actually engaged with you, came back and made a subsequent visit and applied after a repeat visit, they were the ones that were getting hired at 4 times the rate. So that's pretty interesting. Again, we're really getting to the world of content here. The other thing we found was the people, one of the things Clinch does really well is we're cognizant of the fact that not all organizations have a lot of content. So what we think is a good job of is we help them repurpose existing corporate content. So quite often people will say, "We have no content." You all have content. You've got people stories, you've got company performance. There is content there, and it's just not always put in the right place. But we find if we pull in even a corporate blog about the performance of the company, it could equally be an employer branding blog, the candidates that read those blog posts and then go on to apply for a job are getting hired at 4 times the rate of the people that don't. And this starts to lead to some really exciting possibilities around understanding who the recruitment team should be talking to when you start to apply some lead score into this. And that's some of the stuff we do in terms of piping post-apply lead scores in. So a recruiter who's looking at a sea of 1,000 applications for a job can now start to home in pretty quickly on the people who've actually taken the time to engage with the employer branding content and what we would call a committed candidate. Video is really important as well, and again, the numbers are getting better. So the candidates who bother to watch a video and then go on to make a subsequent job application, they're getting hired at 8 times the rate. So there's the value of all the video you're creating, particularly if you can measure who's engaging with it, track them, and then help the recruitment team use that to make better data decisions about who they should be speaking to. So I guess why do people who engage with employer branding content get hired more? It is causal, and we all kind of know the real answers. They have a real interest in the company. They're taking the time to understand the organization. They're also having more meaningful conversations with recruiters when they're being screened because they know what the organization and the jobs are potentially about. And I think this goes back to what Dave was talking about earlier. The candidate decision journey is not really linear anymore, but it looks, if you were to unwind it, it kind of looks like this. So they start looking. They Google jobs or they search for jobs in job boards. They hopefully hit the company job pages. If they're really interested, they start to engage with the career site. They quite likely leave and they start to engage with third-party content. Maybe it's blog posts, maybe it's news in the paper, maybe it's social content that your team have pushed out there. Quite often you see at the end of that cycle, we see Glassdoor get huge attribution as a source of hire, but it's not a real source of hire for a lot of employers. It's that last step in the journey for them. They know about your brand, they know who you are, and it's exactly the same way that I look at a hotel on TripAdvisor before I click the buy button. So they're doing the same thing. And then they ultimately come back to your career site and they apply for the job. So the career site quite often gets that disproportionate attribution in the applicant tracking system because it's only seeing the page before they came in, and that doesn't tell the full story of that journey. Quite likely could last days, weeks, or in some extreme cases it could last years. So the other interesting thing about this, and this is where the recruiter starts to come into the game, all these things are happening before these people have even spoken to your recruitment team. So these are all happening online. They're not engaging with people. They're actually doing this research themselves. So again, we look at this what we call the engagement loop, and we think about people who are considering your brand. They start to evaluate you. They maybe consider making an application. Maybe they don't make it today. They have ongoing exposure. And really, if I was a better PowerPoint designer, I'd have driven that a bit more like a spiral. They start to spiral down into increasing exposure to your brand. And then at some point, they decide, you know what, these guys could be the guys for me. And if your brand is top of mind, when they've had a bad day at work with their existing employer, guess what? You get that application. And you quite likely hire that person. So, and again, the self-service element of this is kind of important because if you think about how you go shopping online for a holiday, a TV, or a car, most of us don't want to have a conversation with anybody about that purchase. We don't necessarily enjoy going into a shop and being hounded about a purchase until we have some degree of knowledge. And that exact same thing is happening in the world of people when they're looking at jobs. They're mirroring their behavior when they go shopping online, and what they want to do is they want to do this research themselves. They want to self-serve themselves as much of that content, and only then when they're really ready do they want to start to interact with a person who ideally becomes a recruiter. So what are candidates really looking for? Well, Indeed is an okay example. They're not looking for the job description. They know about that, okay? They've seen that on the job board. They've seen it on your job pages. They're looking for more than that. So when we looked at all the different things they're looking at, we've seen great presentations already today talking about a lot of these different things. They're looking for information on the culture of the company, its values, the people they'll be working with, the leadership, the type of work-life balance they can have there. To the Vodafone presentation, I thought was really amazing. They're interested in what type of tools are they going to be working with. That's the stuff they want to know about. Are they going to have their own desk? They're the things they want to know before they're going to think about coming and applying for you. Research did quite a lot of them. We've worked with Ali before in the candies, so culture and values do crop up there all the time, and they're usually the ones that get sort of spoken about the most. But I think when you get into the data, it goes deeper. People stories are so important. The story earlier that Dave alluded to, what a powerful story to get people, move them, because you're trying to move people, and that's why we tell stories. We want to move them to come and work with your organization, because you really are generally trying to move people. It's the people who are applying for the jobs and sadly not getting them are typically the ones you don't want to hire. You want to hire somebody who's doing that job in another organization, and you need to move them. So if you're not telling these stories, I think everybody here is telling the stories. I think the real challenge is they're not making it as easy for the candidate to consume them. Stepping back to that picture of the job landing page that's sitting on Workday or Taleo or whatever ATS it happens to be. That's where your stories need to be for maximum effect. And if you don't do that, you're wasting money. So you're putting all the money into employer branding and you're creating amazing content, but you're really, and if you think back to those numbers, 4 or 5% of people may be seeing it. That's the limit of the exposure. So if you can figure out ways, and it's not all about technology, to expose more of your brand to candidates through their candidate journey, sometimes it's really simple stuff. It can be even putting links to content into the job description purely because your ATS doesn't support video. It can be really simple stuff like that. Recruiter time and effort has been wasted, ask a recruiter what they dislike the most. They're like, I'm a sales guy. What do sales guys not like? We don't like having conversations with unqualified buyers. Recruiters are the same. They don't want to have a conversation with somebody who is not likely to be able to get the job. That's a hard day for them to have to process 1,000 applications and drill into the 5 people that might actually get hired. And then lastly, and this is something over the journey of being involved in HR tech I started to get more passionate about, a lot of candidate time is wasted. So think about those people who are making applications for jobs and are putting effort in and they're not getting it. And the numbers are horrible, as you all know. Like in some cases, it's 1,000 applications to get one hire, which is really 999 people have wasted an hour of their time because they didn't get the information they needed to make an intelligent decision whether they should apply for the job or whether they should not apply. Most people want to know what the disqualifiers for the role are rather than what you want them to be able to do. So, summing up, surprisingly low percentages of candidates are engaging with your employer brand or on your career site, possibly less than 10%, but the ones that are the ones that you all want to hire. Teshukar Ederin. Oh, and we have 4 minutes. So do you want the rest of the story or do you want to ask any questions? Okay, the rest of the story. So the Sultan goes, well, I'm not going to let Queen Victoria tell me what to do, right? So he packed up 5 ships here in Istanbul in 1847. They sailed to Ireland. Took them a lot longer than it took me to get over here yesterday. And they landed in Drogheda and they unloaded the food. And genuinely, thousands of lives were saved. And I don't think today you'll find anybody in Ireland that doesn't like a kebab in some form or other. So it obviously had a long-term effect as well. Thank you very much.